You're watching the Eternal Tournament Series.
Hello and welcome to the Eternal Tournament Series Season 5 Invitational. We're finally here. We've had 7 weeks of build-up over the weeks. Players have been playing in our weekly opens and doing well if they're going to be in today's tournament. 32 players have been selected. The invitations are out, the decks are in, and they're ready to play. But we're not going to play just yet. The action starts at noon, which is about 45 minutes from now. And in the meantime, though, we wanted to do something a little extra for this extra special tournament, and we're going to do a pregame show. That's what we are right now. We're pre-gaming. We're going to look into the meta, some of the decks that came in today, some of the more interesting ones, and maybe not so interesting ones. Get used to the same old, and see some of the new stuff as well. And to join me, I am Sir Rhino in breaking down this 32 deck meta game is rekenner, our lovely tournament organizer.
Good morning out there, everyone. And yeah, thanks, Rhino. I'm glad to be in the casting booth for more than just the end game credits for once.
Yep. And we are happy to have you here. Believe it or not, rekenner also has a wonderful mind for this sort of thing, loves giving us all the stats and fun little graphics, but also has an opinion on all this as well. So we'll be hearing that too as we go through this. So I believe we're going to start with just the general meta breakdown, right, rekenner?
Yeah. The as kind of always, our players tend to be fairly, as I like to call it, let's say, fiercely independent. You look at some card game events, and you can put on a chart of like 5 slices, and you can cover 99% of the decks in the event with 1 or 2 rogue decks here or there in a field of a few hundred players. But we often have maybe 12 or 15% of the meta be the largest deck, and it falls from there. And this event is kind of the epitome of that. We have only 6 decks that have multiple pilots, and we have 19 different decks. Over half the field are one-ups.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. It seems to me like this would be a nightmare to try to figure out how to combat, really.
Yeah, it's intriguing. A lot of, my perspective on the meta is like, oh, it's everything we've seen before, but it's very spread out, right? We see some big Combre, some aggressive Combre, some Ricano Plate, Burn Queen Chalice, like it Praxis mid-range, which surprisingly isn't the most played deck here. Instead, big Combre tied with some other things as we see. But it might be all things we've seen before, but as you mentioned, it's really spread out. If you were trying to attack one specific deck, that's likely not going to work out for you here. And it seems like a lot of players realized that and didn't go with any kind of crazy out there deck that was like super tuned to build, beat, say, just Praxis or just Plate or just Queen. Because if you did that, the 80 or 90% of the other decks you're going to see just aren't that there.
Yeah, I think the only real commonality you can say is you need a way to answer the little played card Sandstorm Titan.
Mm.
I know it's not played that often on the ladder. It's a niche card. But no, approximately 2/3 of the field does have time in at least in their deck list. I believe that it is a majority share of all of the decks, but specifically Kamato's list, who is more, even though he is TJS, his list isn't really like Dark Combre, which is, Time, Justice, Splash, Shadow. His is more, say, Mossy Xenon is kind of the cute name I've heard for it.
All right.
Where he is mostly Xenon Splash for things like Seraph, Protect, Stand Together. He runs Ion, the Abductor in the main, doesn't even have Combre Healer in his list, for example.
Okay, yeah, that sounds like Xenon Splash Justice, which fine way to do it. You gain some powerful cards, so I'm sure we'll get to that deck at some point. But as far as the meta breakdown goes, is there anything that stood out as surprising to you? Like as either you thought more of something would show up or less of something that, than you expected showed up?
Well, I am a little surprised that Praxis midrange is tied as the most common deck. It did have a bit of dominance for 3 weeks running, where it won the ETS from August 7th, 5th, 12th, and 19th. But even Casey Nabrev, who brought Praxis midrange to a top 4 finish in the 5th and his win in the 12th, he actually decided to bring Xenon Control instead. But still, for Praxis midrange is still, approximately 12% of the meta. I actually wouldn't say it's a surprise,
right?
Given the recent nerf, but 0 players did bring Armory, which last Invitational we saw 3 players bring it. We didn't actually see it much represented in Season 3. But Season 2, it had a little bit of representation. In Season 1, it took 3rd.
Yeah, I believe it was Season 2, the season where I eliminated all of them myself.
Yes, your
with
run
Felm Control.
Yeah, you run through the lower bracket with Felm Control, where it was just the gauntlet of Armory players that you somehow managed to run all the way through.
I had a good time with that. That was Champion of Cunning flexing its muscles, but not. There's only, I think, one Champion of Cunning today, which makes me sad.
Yes, Tatsumaki brought Feln, and he is the only person to have brought Feln, which actually did surprise me a little bit. Where the historical logic was always that Feln beats Cambrai, it doesn't quite have the ease to beat, say, all of the time mid-range / control decks in this field.
I do like Felm more against Praxis than Cambrai because Praxis doesn't have Stand Together or Protect.
True.
So I think that matchup you're still pretty okay with, although Praxis can just keep the threats coming, but they're also more Dawnwalker based, and Steward of the Path lines up well against that. So I think Felm versus Praxis is a really cool matchup, but Felm also matchups nicely with Burn Queen and Rakano Plate. So it's just a nice, at least to me, safe deck. And I think that's what we're seeing a lot in this metagame is just players bringing, not trying to go next level or do anything too fancy, and instead just bringing things they're comfortable with, decks that they feel like were the safe choice that they know how to work. Right, we've got Unearthly on Rakano. We've seen that before. Angry Chicken on Cambrai. The one change of, as you said, Casey Nabrev bringing up Xenon instead of Praxis what was maybe the surprising thing. But again, Brady Kins on Chalice Control. So just a lot of use what you got here with is really the story of this metagame.
Yeah. I also did want to note one thing that kind of surprised me was Paradox had been honing Skycrag for the last month or so, and while he brought a Skycrag list to the August 19th ETS, and he did fairly poorly with it. But I'm actually surprised to see that made him gun shy about bringing it. He actually switched to Rakano Plate, which I honestly find a little bit suspect, given that he knew his round 1 opponent would be his teammate, Hythar, who is famous for Big Cambrai.
Yeah, so I think maybe, at least when I go into these tournaments, I don't really put any stock into who my turn or round 1 opponent is, other than maybe as like a tiebreaker between two decks. And it may just have been that they had no interest in Skycrag or anything at that point. It may have been Rakano versus something else, and they just settled on Rakano anyway. Because while your round 1 opponent is important, this is a double elimination tournament, so that first loss can hurt a lot. You've still got to beat everybody else in your way to the top. So it's more about picking the best deck, even if it's not the best deck for what you expect your round 1 opponent.
Right. Also, one of our, say, maybe not notable list that didn't show up, but it has been seeing some success in the TCG esports tournaments. It's kind of the Pearlescent Drake flyer archetypes. I know you've had some experience building that in Feln, in Elysian. One of our casters, who will be casting later today, Kalimdir, has had success with the Huru version.
Yeah.
Do you think that's just a lack of people being comfortable with the deck? Because you've said that you think that a flyers list capped by something like Pearlescent Drake would kind of roll over this field.
Yeah, I don't know if it's, a guaranteed rollover, but I would love to be in a flying deck, especially like a Huru's Flyers list in this field with all these time decks. But the problem there is that it can have some problems against Rakano plate, especially. Certain Huru lists can have problems with that. And sometimes Burn Queen can get under you. So it's about finding that balance in answering both sides of the meta, where we've got all this burn and aggro on one side, all these big time decks on the other, and flying over time is a great thing to do. But those kind of decks haven't been explored a lot yet, and it may have just been teams. It may have been on their radar, but they just didn't have time to refine or build them or anything like that. And instead, just wanted to go with what they know. I would have liked to have seen something to try and attack the meta, but as we were talking about, it's so varied right now. It's hard to just build one deck that attacks meta. I'm a bit more sad that there's no Haunting Scream.
Yes. Sunnyvale, a notable player of the Haunting Scream archetype on and off over the last year or so, did qualify with Scream actually in the early part of season 5 before we actually had set 2.
Right.
And Haunting Scream has actually gotten some interesting new cards.
Yeah, the change to Minotaur Lighthoof really brought about like some added consistency to the deck that it lacked before. Now Haunting Scream could like bring back Minotaur Lighthoof, give unblockable to one of your like Direwolf Beast colors that are stranded on the board, and start the ball rolling again. Stuff like that. So I really like how it's looked. I know I believe Ilya did well with it in not an ETS tournament, but the TCG tournament. I believe we got second like 2 weeks ago with it. So it's been at least on people's radar, but nobody wanted to pull the trigger on it for this tournament. So again, it's only 32 players. The meta can be a little bit insular, and again, it's players just wanted to bring what they were, I guess, most comfortable and felt safest with, and that's what we're seeing here. So let's move on to specific deck breakdowns. Is there one we wanted to start on, Rekenner?
Actually, I think we want to first talk about how teams have shaped up and evolved going into the Season 5 Invitational. I know this isn't quite your area of expertise, so I will maybe lead this a little bit.
Yeah.
So the most major news is a few weeks ago, 2 teams, Voprex Favored and the Mediocre Parliament, ended up actually merging to form Team Owls and Dragons, which is kind of our first, air quote, super team. They have some very notable players. It contains 2 Invitational winners, Toth and Angry Chicken, and also has our leader in series points out of the players who have not already qualified in Unearthly. And this team is actually the most well-represented team in the event. I believe there's over 10 players from Team Owls and Dragons in the event. It's a very strong team. Team Voprex Favorite was always well-represented in previous seasons. And while Team Mediocre Parliament was a bit smaller, they often had players that were making very deep runs. And so this kind of combination of expertise has led to, hopefully will lead to rather, say the evolution of best of 3, best of 5 play, because really, while we don't have any official support for teams like some other games do, it is mostly about, practice partners and being available, sharing deck lists, etc.
Yeah. Teams, I'm hoping just the increased testing for eternal tournaments. I just play in the gauntlet, Gauntlet's the best tester around, but
Yeah.
I think for people looking to step it up, I like that teams have been developed. People are starting to take this real seriously, start to hopefully innovation follows behind that. Obviously, it's not happening here. Instead, like it's not like all 10 players showed up with the same deck. We don't have any kind of team deck. It's more they're using it to bounce the ideas off each other, it seems, and just refine their own individual lists that they think are still very strong.
Yeah. And as has been kind of joked about, Team Sea Power Gaming did pick up Skij, a player who has not managed to take top 2 in an invitational, but he's been around since season 3. He's made a lot of deep runs, done well in a lot of weeklies. He has finally joined a team, aside from just playing against the Gauntlet AI.
Don't knock it till you try it, man.
Yeah. Hey. With set 2, the improvements to the Gauntlet have made Gauntlet pretty tough. I've had some sick Combre curve outs, CRF into Titan into Reality Warden, and it's just like, I'm playing Arcano. I'm just trying to earn some gold here, man. Anyway, one of our other new teams is Team STT, Sabertooth Tigers, the longtime rival of the Dire Wolf, as the joke goes. And it was formed by Swan, who won the August 12th ETS. And while he's actually the only person on the team in the Invitational, both Cauldra and Bruised by God were notable names this season. Cauldra actually was on the cusp of qualifying for the Invitational at both the last ETS of the season and the last chance qualifier. He didn't quite make it either event, but he had very strong Swiss runs and just didn't quite manage to convert.
Yeah, that was the Sky.
Really sad.
That was the Sky Seer Chalice list, right? Was that
yes.
Calder was on? Yeah, that list was very cool.
Bruised by God.
No joke.
Indeed. And Bruised by God was kind of famous for putting together one of the first, Bart Pants lists and running it in ETS.
Also played the Valkyrie Spire Guard. Right?
Yes.
Yeah, that was.
But it also includes Tiger HC, who was famous for Xenon Killers late in set 1 meta, but he didn't really play much in season 5. Hopefully, you'll see him back for season 6. And then there's also Team ALGN, which has both Bob Mavs and aReNGee from this event. It's I've talked to Bob Mavs, and it's actually an entirely Italian team, which is very interesting. We've seen some regional teams before. We saw Love Up in the Season 3 Invitational and the mid-season major. And his team was mostly a South American team. So hopefully we might see some similar results from one of these two players. And then finally, Team ET, Eternal Titans. This team is kind of a less tournament-focused team. It has some players like Neon, who have not really had the chance to play in ETS, and formerly Jaffa and Sunnyvale, who hadn't really had time to play in ETS. But Sunny managed to spike one of our early ETS of this season, and Jaffa actually managed to spike the LCQ last weekend. So this is both of their first invitationals. And unfortunately, Sarius, one of the main players from ET to have a lot of tournament success, didn't really play in Season 5, but as is, it seems like he will be a lock to make Worlds based on points. So we'll hopefully be seeing him in a few months at the very least, even if he doesn't want to show up for Season 6.
Okay, so that is that all the teams we've got? Is that the 5 now? Is that what we're at? Again, I'm not an expert on this, so I'm going to take your
well,
word
I think
for
there are another couple of small teams, but those are the teams that are represented in this invitational.
Right. Gotcha. Yeah, Team ET. Wow, this is really Jaffa and Sunnyvale's first invitational. I didn't even thought they would
Yeah, I
been
believe
in one by now.
Jaffa. Jaffa was a player in the Scions League, but that was a little bit
Yeah.
before my time, unfortunately, in terms of paying attention to the tournament scene.
Yeah, these are some names that go back. It's good to see him back in the game. Set 2 brought with it some new strategies and some old players that are now new players again, it seems. So that's great. Now do we get to move on and break down some decks?
I guess you've been a little bit bored recently. Yes, let's start talking about decks.
All right. How about everybody's favorite exciting deck, Combray Midrange?
Well, yeah, but level 13 David has brought an interesting take on Combray Midrange, fairly similar to the list that you played late in Season 4 and in the Season 4 Invitational.
Yeah, this is a bit of a different take on it. By the time I got to the Invitational, I was back on my Combray Flyers list, but the deck I used to qualify for that one was pretty, well, it was kind of close to this, and that it was, packing the Reality Warden, Predatory Carnosaur, Sandstorm Titan, Night Chancellor, Seraph, with Obelisk and Stand Together kind of plan. But David's got some interesting takes on it here. So the idea is Initiate of the Sands and Awaken Soon give you some pretty strong starts, and you just back it up with value and other big bodies. The notable this deck is more noteworthy because of what it's not playing in its strategy than what it is. At least I think. First off, or I guess the one thing that is notable in what it is playing is Dawnwalker. We haven't seen Dawnwalker in a Combray list in quite some time. Generally, you're going to see that in Elysian or basically anything else, right? Elysian, Xenon, and Praxis love Dawnwalker, whether it's killer shenanigans or just an aggressive card. But generally, that spot in Combray is taken up by a card that's not in level 13 David's list, and that is Valkyrie Enforcer. No Valkyrie Enforcer, no Combray healers in David's list. Instead, just the 4 Dawnwalker, 4 Seraph, going full in on this aggressively tilted big ground game. No flyers anywhere for David at all. Instead, just beef on the ground trying to dominate that. The other notable exclusion here, it's in the side, but no main board protects, which I think is one of the best cards in a lot of Combray lists. There's just so many spots where if you get to hold up protect, your opponent's just in a really awkward spot. But David decided to just shove 2 of those in the side and have no main board, along with some slows and some other things in the side. More stand-togethers in the sideboard as well. Extra predatory Carnosaur Praxis Placer, stuff like that. So just all in on just gumming up the ground and eventually just taking over with just massive units, right? Sandstorm Titan and Reality Warden and Xenon Obelisk on top of that and Stand Together on top of that. He's going to have the biggest units in play almost at all times. It's just, can that translate to winning games? And we have to find that out.
Yeah. Like you said, I think the lack of like Valkyrie Enforcer has kind of been, the long time thought for Combray was, well, you start with 4 Desert Marshals and 4 Valkyrie Enforcers. Those are non-negotiable. But here it is.
Here it is, and I'm really intrigued to see how that works out. Because essentially you're swapping the Enforcers for Dawnwalkers, and Enforcer's an incredibly powerful and flexible card, but sometimes it is awkward to play alongside Sandstorm Titan, I suppose, and that might have been David's thinking here. We'll have to see how it pans out. The fact that there's none main board or sideboard, though, that's quite a spot to stand on that I really don't think I've ever seen anybody do.
Yeah. I've always actually really liked the idea of Dawnwalker plus Stand Together in a deck, but it always seemed a little clunky. But cutting Valkyrie Enforcer as a 3-drop might make it a little easier to not be kind of glutted on 3, as it were. Right.
Yeah, there's a bevy of options always available to Combray mid-range decks, and we'll see that as we see some other big Combray lists. Even in this new set, it got Spirit Guide. We've seen Copperhall Bailiff. We've seen Combray Healer. Some players want to play Amber Acolyte, even though I don't like that because your other options at 3 are so strong. But there's no shortage of good cards to play. And obviously, Seraph's always going to be there. So there's no real shortage of good things to do on 3 in Combray. And that's part of what makes building Combray actually interesting, is figuring out what mid-range tools do I want to use. And David's going with some of the more aggressive ones here. Just lots of, you've got these 3 drops with Overwhelm into just big bodies. And we'll have to see how that works out. But let's contrast this to a more traditional, I want to say, Combray list. Let's go to the king of Combray with Angry Chicken. How about that?
Yeah, Angry Chicken. He's obviously one of our most famous big Combray players. But his list is kind of one of the lists that's made me debate kind of the blurred line between mid-range and control. Although this list is more control compared to some of his earlier iterations on big Combray.
Yep. So Angry Chicken bringing the staples I alluded to that David did not, right? 4 Protect main deck, 4 Valkyrie Enforcer main deck. Great Parliament here as well. So just going big with Iron Thorn and Mystic Ascendant. No Harsh Rule main deck. This is something I've always preached about. They are in the side. Sometimes you need to bring them in. Also, the Vodakins are in the side, so you can kind of board into Voda combo to go over the top of things, or lower your curve, or bring in Harsh Rule to deal with things trying to go under you. But the main deck is just brutal mid-range efficient. Not doing a whole lot early. We're not going to see any bad cards in terms of top decks like Initiate of the Sands or Awakened Student. Like the whole point of this deck and the way it's built is that every time you draw a card, it's either going to be power or an impactful spell, or it's going to draw you towards those, like Temple, right? So Combray Healer, Seraph, Enforcer, Sandstorm Titan, like no matter when you play these in the game, they're going to have an impact. Like Valkyrie Enforcer on turn 20 is still a very good card. It's a flyer and it has a silence to it. And that's the deck building philosophy Angry Chicken's going with here. And if you get in a board stall, Martial Iron Thorn, Great Parliament, break those in. So just a clean, like amazing list really from Angry Chicken here. And it really shows off the power of Protect, where you just have all of these singular, incredibly threatening cards like Martial Iron Thorn, Mystic Ascendant, and Protect pairs so well with those cards that you have to answer them twice or sometimes 3 times.
Yeah. I'm not sure if it's really the Angry Chicken style of big Combray, but maybe his lines of play. He's shown his use of the 8 silences in the deck to be kind of crucial to the way he wins in the mirror. I've kind of started thinking of it as the Angry Chicken maneuver of, play a couple of big flyers out and all in then one turn, playing 2 or 3 silences, a couple of vanquishes, getting rid of every single Titan on the board, and suddenly swinging in for 20 damage in the air. Your opponent, maybe has 1 protect up or maybe 2 protects up, but he will brute force his way through all of the, units cannot fly effect and slam in. We've seen him do it a few times on stream, and it's always, the first time I saw it, it was just like, oh, this is why he's so good.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll see plenty of Angry Chicken on coverage. Is there any other decks we wanted to touch on here next? Anything that caught your eye?
Yeah, I would actually like to talk about Danabor's deck list. I know it's kind of your favorite deck name, but it's Icaria Blue, although maybe it's more FJP control.
Yeah, this specifically says Fire Justice Primal Control, so that sounds like a good name to me.
Yeah, usually Icaria Blue tends to have more in the way of weaponry, but this list doesn't have Sword of Icaria anywhere in the 90. It has 3 Arc Rune Hammers in main, 1 Star Steel Daisho. It does have 4 Rise to the challenge, so it does have access to those weapons a little bit more frequently than you'd think, just based on the numbers.
Right.
Rise for Runehammer is still just as strong as it ever was. Rise for Starsteel Daisho will still end the game in 2 turns. But he's running 3 Icaria, so he's naturally going to run into those a little bit more frequently than most Icaria Blue lists, which sometimes run only 1 Icaria in the main.
Mm-hmm.
He's also running a duelist blade in the side, presumably for some of the more burn-focused lists.
I love the Roland's Fist in the sideboard. Oh, man. Ready for those Moktos, right? Is that what that is?
Yeah, possibly. That one's an interesting one, given that some people thought Roland's Fist when they first saw it, it was a relic weapon, but it's actually just a weapon.
Yeah, you gotta have a unit in play.
Yeah, and there's really only 7 units in Danabor's list that are really good targets for it in the Icarias, the Isfail Drake, and the Throne Wardens, and that they have an Aegis, so it's not quite so easy. Well,
Valkyrie Enforcer. I mean, they've got
Kothon and Valkyrie Enforcer are a little less interesting for that, just because they don't have an Aegis. It's much easier to get a 2-for-1 with your 6 cost weapon. Although if all you wanted it for is the silence effect, then yeah.
Yeah, I think, if you're playing Roland's Fist, it's because you actually want to silence Valkyries, or then, I mean, they're in a deck that could cast Deep Forge Plate. That could have just been a Deep Forge Plate. But they specifically chose Roland's Fist, and it may just be for the lulls or something like that, but there might be more to it. Like, they may have found in testing that Moktos can be a real problem, and they just somehow wanted access to Roland's Fist to silence them or something. Regardless, there aren't a ton of Moktos in the tournament, so we'll see if that sees any action. But I like this list from Danabor. We've seen these styles of lists do well in past tournaments, so no reason to think it can't do well here, especially with the decrease in Praxis. And there doesn't look like there's a ton of Dawnwalker's decks, but there's still a decent amount, and that can be trouble for this deck. Main deck. 2 main deck Rain of Frogs, 4 main deck Rise that is a lot of 4-cost cards that do nothing. So yeah, we'll see if all these tempo negative plays end up being a little too much to handle.
I am interested in seeing the Rain of Frogs in main, although of course there's if you expect the tournament meta to be slower and dirtier than than ladder, even though the ladder has kind of slowed down a little bit recently, but also slower than the main weeklies, which it usually is, they make a little bit more sense because, especially against lists with like 3 or 4 Heart of the Vault, because Heart of the Vault is actually one of the cards that gives lists, spell-based lists, a lot of trouble.
Oh yeah.
If a big Conbray list has a Reality Ward on the board, well, Heart of the Vault just looks like a really expensive cantrip. But when all you have on board is maybe like a Valkyrie Enforcer is not going to block a Heart of the Vault. So it's a big threat on the board. You have to answer it. It also drew a card. Maybe it was even warped off the top and like broke the last armor off your Auric Rune Hammer. It's just like, it can swing a game from, I'm doing pretty well. I've got a grip of good cards to, oh, I'm losing very quickly. And if you can hit a Heart of the Vault with Rain of Frogs, you can kind of say shut the door on a game that you're a little bit ahead in. If you have the breathing room to cast a Rain of Frogs.
Yeah, but the other problem is 25% of the metagame is pretty aggressive. Actually, more than that. I mean, that's just Rakano Plate and Burn Queen. There's still we saw David's aggressive Combray list. There's some other aggressive lists out there, and all the Lightning Storms in the side. I think that's a reasonable approach to take for this metagame. There's only 3 though. They don't even have the full 4. So they're going to be leaning real hard on the 4 Torch, 4 Kothon, 4 Enforcer to really show up when you need it to early and be the speed bump you need to get to the mid to late game. And we'll have to see how that works out for Danny.
Mm-hmm. One last thing I kind of wanted to note about Danabor's list, by the way, is that I do really like the split between Vanquish and Island's Choice in the main. I've seen some people advocate for like all Island's Choice, or like, oh, well, Island's Choice sucks. It's just a slow, it's just a 3-cost Vanquish. But I really like the split because there definitely are things that will never swing that Island's Choice can't hit. Especially in a list especially in terms with public deck lists. If your opponent has Island's Choice in their list, they have 3 open power, you have a 6/6 Mystic Ascendant, you're not going to swing. You just go, well, hey, I'm just going to keep drawing cards.
Yeah.
what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, in my experience, it's Vanquish is better against the time decks. Island's Choice is better against, say, Rakano, Argenport, things like that, where they're swinging, because if a Rakano deck puts a weapon on a unit and swings at you, you can't Vanquish it till the next turn, but you can Island's Choice it right away. And
Right.
of course, Island's Choice also has the counter a spell aspect to it, although like taking out an Obliterate or something like that against Burn can be useful. Or the other thing I like Island's Choice against is also Burn Queen lists, because they normally don't have a lot of Vanquish targets other than, say, Champion. But Island's Choice can actually hit a lot of units when Queen comes into play.
Yes,
which can be nice. So I like this 3-2 split for now. I think that's a reasonable spot to be in. Notable though that there's just one more Vanquish in the side, no more Island's Choice, so just max out on 3+3. But also some Permafrost and some other removal. You alluded to the Duelist Blade and Runehammer, so some cool stuff there as well.
And let's real quick actually talk about Balak's list.
Okay. That'll be Argenport, right?
Yes. Yes.
Oh.
Although he's actually running what I think is kind of a fairly interesting build of Argenport for one specific reason, and that is the 4 Umbran Reapers in the main.
Yeah.
That is not actually something I've seen very frequently in Argenport, but when I kind of saw this list, I was like, "Huh, wait a second."
Yeah,
That's interesting.
Yeah, we've seen this a bit in the past, and essentially, once you look at this list, all of the units, other than the 3 Steward of the Past, are evasive. They're all flyers or unblockable, except for Instigator, and Instigator still has some pinging effects, right? And Steward is just Steward of the Past, so it makes sense that they're here. But everything else is wonderful weapon targets, and we see the 4 Lethrai Falchion, and then Umbran Reaper, even if you take it out, is a form of reach. So you're overloading silences here a lot between both Umbran Reaper and Macdo. And then you can easily take to the skies because you can silence Sandstorm Titans. You have 3 Annihilate, 4 Vanquish, 4 Slay. All of those hit Sandstorm Titan. So you're not worried about that card at all. Just a pile of efficient, good 1-for-1 removal, and then efficient, good must-answer threats. And then if you fall behind, you're going to lean on the Lethrai Falchions to help you win the race against aggro decks, because this deck can definitely fall behind with the curve it's presenting. But once it gets ahead, it's pretty hard to stop it from staying.
Yeah. And the other thing I kind of liked about the Umbran Reaper specifically is sometimes eventually your Bartholo will be answered. An opponent will put together the 2 or 3 or even 4 removal spells necessary to bring down the Aegis and the Bartholo and your second Bartholo. But the Bartholo has almost certainly got in some amount of chip damage, or maybe even not chip damage, but huge swings with a Lethrai Falchion, and Umbran Reaper can finish an opponent off. The if that effect goes off without the opponent having a protect up or having a silence available, that's 5 free damage. We've also seen players hold on to Umbran Reaper plus Annihilate or Vanquish or Vara's Favor to play an Umbran Reaper and kill the Umbran Reaper. And because of the way Eternal works, there's no actual way to respond to that.
Right.
So unless you actually specifically have Protect for your face right then and there, you're taking 5.
Yeah. You either need to have Protect or Backlash for the thing targeting Umbran Reaper. It's a tricky thing to do. You can't, silence the Umbran Reaper in response because the spell's not targeting your stuff or anything like that.
Right.
But so very cool list from Balak. I expect that to do well. But again, this is all based on if you hit the right pocket of the meta. But we'll just have to, again, wait and see as we are getting ready for all this awesome action. We've broken down some of the decks, but there's a lot more in store. 32 players, not 32 different decks, but still a lot of variety ahead of us as we start this double elimination tournament And today we'll be playing 7 rounds, getting down to top 8. So we'll return and get all the specifics of that. And it looks like I might be in the booth for today as Column is running into some tech issues. So we're going to figure all that out. And when we come back, which will be in about 15-20 minutes, we'll have
less than that.
Less than that? Oh man, the action's coming quick then, as we will be bringing back the first round of the Season 5 Invitational.